Hey, I'm Jade, and today I'm going to talk about how the harm OCD and POCD, those types of themes, how the fear cycle fuels them, and how you can work towards getting better from any of these related themes, as I have. So the first thing to talk about, and I'm going to be giving examples of things I did, things you can do, things you've tried that may not have worked, and how you could have another go at them and introduce some new things. So it's going to be a really rounded video covering all the aspects needed. And I'm going to try and keep it short and snappy so that there's not too much to get through. So first of all, let's start by talking about how you might be feeling right now. So I'm imagining that you're watching this and you're suffering with harm OCD, something related to that. Maybe it's POCD for you. Maybe you're a parent, maybe you're not a parent yet. Maybe you're struggling with harm OCD around your loved ones, around yourself, and you're just really feeling stuck. I can highly relate to this. You might be sitting there, thoughts are just bombarding you all the time. If you're anything like me, I used to wake up and I'd have 5 seconds where I felt like, oh my gosh, it's gone, I'm better, it's finally loosened and gone. And then it would just hit me. And you'd remember everything, and you'd remember the proof and the examples of why somehow you've convinced yourself that you're a scary, dangerous person and that you're exactly like the people you fear. And so then the tempting route for the day of rumination comes in and you start the cycle. Let me try and remember the things that are going to make me feel better. What things have I said to myself in the past that unlatched this? How can I just get through the day by avoiding certain things? What's the plan for the day? How can I get out of those plans? What can I watch on TV that's not going to include any triggers for me so that I can just get through the day with as minimal suffering as possible? And so at my worst, I suffered all the time. And so avoidance, it was only natural because it was like the one way to slightly alleviate what I was going through, and it would just help me to be able to cope with the day. What I didn't realize until I got through it all was that actually by doing that, I was making it worse progressively. So you don't see it overnight that every day it's getting worse, but after maybe 18 months of avoidance, not facing fears, staying in comfort zones, then all of a sudden you're like, wow, my life is a lot different than it was 2 years ago. And that's something that today really alarms me when I look back on how much I missed. I remember turning down things that would have been so much fun that I missed out on. Things as well, like my things I can't go back to, which I'm at peace with. There was one point with my OCD where I was so anxious that I could barely even walk a different route to the train for work. And so the idea of being, I was a bridesmaid for my one of my best friends, and they were going to Ibiza for the hen do. It was like I wouldn't even be able to go overnight somewhere with people in the UK at that point. I dreaded holidays. And so all those memories they have of that shared experience, I don't have that with them now because I didn't go. And at the time, it was like, yes, I've got a great excuse. I've not been very well. And she took it so well and she was really accepting. And I explained to her about my anxiety. But now that I look back, isn't it a shame? It's like I missed that. At the time, it felt like, yes, another weekend watching Friends and watching whatever movies are going to make me feel good and eating chocolate and just relaxing and being in my comfort zone and just getting through. But that's no way to live. And so I think that's my biggest message is, as scary as the journey feels towards getting better, I promise that it's definitely better than another 2-3 years, 2 months in that place of avoidance. And so you're probably dealing with avoidance right now. You're probably terrified at the idea of exposures. Maybe you are doing exposures, or you have, and they haven't been working. And I'm going to tell you about the missing piece as to why exposures weren't quite doing what I needed them to in a little bit. Other things you might be feeling is terror of, what if this fear is true? What if it actually happens? How can I control my whole life to make sure it never happens? Now, what I've learned on the other side is that controlling life to that degree just takes the joy away. And I do remember when I got maybe 60% better from OCD, I remember that I was surviving and the intrusiveness of the thoughts had gone, in that I wasn't having, I think I used to have like 6 or 7 panic attacks a day at my worst. So it was just like a constant, like, when's the next one going to be? And it would show up in strange places. Like if there was a situation where I had to be just there with my thoughts, like even in a meeting at work, because I was quite safe at work. I didn't feel too triggered at work because you know what's happening. You're always just in an office with a computer and meetings, and that was it. And I remember if someone shut the door in a meeting and there were like 10 of us around the board table, I'd think, we're here for 3 hours. And then the thoughts would start, and I'd be like, I can't just leave. I can't just leave this meeting. And so then it would like panic attack, panic attack, panic attack, like one after the other. And I'd have to run out and I'd just be ill, or I'd go home or something. And like that just started to happen. And that's a good example of how avoidance, when used like a drug, which I did, which is like a constant top me up, like living life in avoidance is like addiction. What happens is that it slowly permeates every area of life. So your safe zones stop being your safe zones, and then everything just starts to shrink. And I just don't want this for you, because it was really upsetting for me that at the start it was like there were only certain things I had to avoid, like direct things that triggered me. Then it became, oh, any image of a trigger, if there's anything on TV that's going to trigger me. And then it goes into like a color, like with harm OCD, the color red is really common. People get a phobia of the color red because it reminds them of gory stuff, which then links to harm, which then flares them up. And that's really common when you just let it build. And so I don't like to think of OCD as like, oh, I've got it, I can't get better because I've had it for 15 years, which was true. I had it for about 17 years in an extreme state. Oh, well, I can't get better because I've had it for such a long time and it's boxed me in so far, there's no way out. Chipping away slowly, you know, like those you might not, but if you're as old as I am, 35, like we had Gobstoppers when we were kids, and like it's like this, they were this big, very hard candy, and it would take forever to get through the layers. And so you had to be really determined, and most people didn't. Like you'd end up, like, they'd be on the floor covered in like grime, and then you just chuck it in the bin. It's really similar to that. By the way, I'm so proud of myself for coming up with that analogy on the spot. That's awesome. Like I was thinking about Gobstoppers yesterday and it just connected. That is really similar. If you give up on that Gobstopper, then you think it's impossible. But actually, if you actually did carry on with it for probably like 4 months, that would take with those big Gobstoppers. It's really similar. Like people give up because they think, well, it's too ingrained in me. It's too locked on. There's no point. And I was actually speaking to a friend in my network who suffers with severe anxiety, and her words were like, there's no point me seeing anyone or talking to anyone about this because it's so bad that like what works for other people wouldn't work for me. I can tell you that I don't hear of many people worse than me with these themes with OCD. I don't hear of many people where I go, whoa, actually that is worse than me. And so if I could get from one side to the other side, you know, being a happy mum who absolutely adores having kids. I went through the worst time ever with OCD, POCD with my first child. I was just so terrified all the time. And then when I overcame everything, having my second child was like a joyful experience. There was no coasting. There was no hiding from anything. There was no compulsions, rumination, nothing at all. It was just the best experience of my life. And so if I can do that, it just goes to show that anybody can. And actually, I believe that the worse you're suffering, the worse you're suffering, then the motivation is greater. So if you have like mild OCD that comes in from time to time, you might be more inclined just to live with it because you're like, well, it doesn't bother me that much. Like, for example, I've got themes I've not really looked at in times because they don't bother me that much. And every now and then they crop up, but they're just not that big of a deal. So I've never really gone there with them. I know that with a little bit of work, they'd completely go altogether and never ever pop up, but they just don't bother me that much. I'm not motivated to do anything. So these are not themes I'm suffering with. It's just that certain things will come up. For example, I get a bit upset about my house not being organized, which I know is like a really silly example because it's such a cliche with OCD, but I genuinely feel quite stressed when things are just like messy and tangled and not, I just don't like it. And I know that probably if I wanted the perfect life, I should do some work around acceptance of that. And I really struggle because I'm like, but I can make it really tidy and I can make my whole house really organized. So why wouldn't I? And yeah, it could be worth me having some motivation to work on those irrational beliefs and live in a bit of mess. Ugh. But I don't want to, and it doesn't bother me that much, so I don't. So if you think about it, if you're harm OCD, if you're POCD, if you're any OCD that's more of a taboo nature, if it's extremely difficult and challenging for you to live with, that can be your motivating force. For me, I was like, I'm not living like this anymore. I am not doing it. I'm a motivated, excited about the world person by nature. And you're like this thing that's just like holding me back and I want you gone. And that's been my mindset in life about most things. If there's something in my way of doing and achieving what I want, I will figure out what can I do to get you out of my way so that I can be who I want to be. And actually part of my recovery, which I'm going to go into now, the steps I took, now that I've, resonated with you on how you might be feeling, part of the steps I took was really breaking down this idea that I needed life to be brilliant. It's like, if I didn't have OCD, life would be amazing. That's not actually true. There's so many other forms of suffering. But at the same time, I had the motivation to get better. And that went too far. So something we call recovery OCD is you might be experiencing is like, but why is the book not sinking in? I'm reading this book, it hasn't worked. Why am I still suffering? Why am I still getting these things? A big part of it is also acceptance of living like this for the rest of your life. That's not saying that we coast and we accept our suffering and don't bother working on it. It's just saying, I would really like to get better, and that is my goal and what I'm aiming for. But I also accept that if it never happened, I could actually live in this state for the rest of my life and life would still be worth living. And that is what gets me through. Say, like, every few months, I'll wake up and I'll think, oh, I feel like OCD is trying to creep into my life here. I don't have to do anything. I just know that I can live that weekend with OCD locked on if it decides to. And what's interesting is that because I'm comfortable with that, it doesn't do anything because I'm not scared of it. So there's nothing for it to latch to. You've got to think of it like this. And I do talk about the amygdala gland sometimes because I don't like to get scientific about OCD, but I do think it's useful. If you just think of it as this switch up here, the amygdala gland is in OCD, like it's turned on when it shouldn't be. Like that's the simple essence of it. It's the fear mechanism to keep us safe. I just think, okay, the switch has gone on for a bit. Like, yeah, go for it. You're misfiring. And I don't say those things to me. It's just what my brain believes. I can live in this state. Same way, like if you were a cave person, however long ago, was it millions of years ago, you probably did live in that state quite a lot of the time because of the threat of being like mauled by tigers or lions. Like you would live in that and you would run to get food or to hunt, and that would be like a normal state. So it's like we can live like that. It's not ideal. So a big part for me was learning to accept, I don't want to live like this, but I can. And think of it this way, because it's not about saying, oh yeah, I'll just live like this and just stop doing anything. It's like training for a marathon. You would really like to eventually run a marathon within a time that is acceptable to you and what you're wanting. If you went, oh, well, even if I don't manage to run a marathon, like I'll still be happy, I'll still be okay in my life. That doesn't mean you stop training for it. It's just that you're comfortable with the fact that you may never get to your goals. An injury might happen. You're comfortable with it. You don't want it to happen, but you're comfortable with it and you're not really upset by it. Maybe you will be upset at the time, but it's not going to ruin your life, and it's certainly not going to stop you training towards that goal. And recovery is the same. You're letting go of the obsession around wanting to achieve this thing. You're like, this would be a nice component part in my life. It would be really nice to get there. But if I don't get there, it's not awful. It's just a shame. And it would feel a bit like wasted time. However, imagine how fast I'll be running at a 10K, or imagine how great I'll be at running up a mountain or trail, whatever, because of all that time I'd put in. And so if you think of it like that, like not being obsessed with getting better from this. The other thing to think about is this idea of a limiting belief, I'll never get better, there's no point. You really want to look at that and think about applying rational thinking to I can never get better, I can never do this. That's down to motivation. Just looking at my notes, so I'm a bit like confused. I've gone off on a tangent. So the other thing I wanted to say is I'll do it tomorrow. If you're like me, I was always like, I just want to enjoy today. I just want to enjoy today. I'm going to do it tomorrow. You're never going to be ready to do the scary exposure. Do it like right now. Don't think, oh, I'll do this and then I'll do it. You're never going to be comfortable. So start to think about the idea of being comfortable with being uncomfortable. I would go into things thinking, right, I am going to have a terrible day today because I've got these exposures I've got to do. And you know what? There you go. There you have it. I'm going to live my life anyway. And it actually got to a point where when I was in this program of exposures and disputing my rational beliefs, which I'll get to in a moment, I was actually fundamentally happier than when I was avoiding it, because at least you're on track. You know, it's like when someone wants to lose a significant amount of weight, they're not going to feel happy if they're on the sofa eating food and watching TV and knowing that that is moving further towards what they don't want. However, even just going for a run around the block, as difficult as it would be, as new as it would be to their life structure, and they feel like there's such a long way to go, at least it's in the right direction. And so they may still be feeling those feelings of I'm not happy with my body, or I'm not happy with my life situation or my health or what I'm able to do, but I'm now on the right track. And that gives you a bit of like momentum. And so let's get to it. What did I do to get better? And first of all, why are people not getting better from harm OCD, POCD, and sexual orientation OCD, all those things? Why are people not getting better from it? Well, I can tell you about why I wasn't getting better from it, and then maybe you'll relate. And I'll also tell you how I then overcame that with the final missing piece of unconditional self and life acceptance and rational thinking. It's like an extra piece in the jigsaw puzzle that I didn't know about before I found this channel and OCD recovery and Rob. And so the first thing is, you have to take it in your own hands. Right, this is just me. I had to take it in my own hands to truly learn about OCD, how it operates, and why people are not getting better. Why people are not getting better is that in severe OCD cases, it's massively misunderstood. Now, I'm really happy for you if you have found something that's worked for you. I think that in milder cases than mine was so severe that this idea of do your exposures, leave the thoughts alone, keep doing exposures, distance yourself from the thoughts. I'd be like, distance myself from the thoughts? You don't understand what is going on in my brain. There is no such thing. There's no possibility that I could distance myself from my thoughts. And I used to sit there thinking, if you knew what it was like in my brain, you would never say that. Now, there are incredible OCD therapists in the world, absolutely incredible. I worked with a really good CBT therapist in my local area who actually was touching on some of the points that I eventually got better with OCD from. And so she did some really great exposures with me. But what was happening was I learned about OCD. I learned about the fact of how my brain worked and the fear cycle worked. And I got about 60% better. I was still really scared. And it just didn't matter how many exposures I did. It wasn't unlatching. And I think the reason for this is, and it's as simple as this, but what if it's real? That just seems to out-trump everything else I did. But what if it's real? But what if it's real? Yeah, you're exposing yourself, but what if it's real? What if it's actually what you want? So it's a bit like if you're scared of harming someone and you don't want to be around knives, for example, or you're scared like around suicide OCD, so you don't want to be on high floors near open windows. What I started to find was that it didn't matter how many times I exposed myself to these triggering situations, but what if its real mechanism wasn't turning off? So interestingly, the more exposures I did, I was able to do bath times a little bit more comfortably, change nappies, be around family members when I was having upsetting thoughts, all these different harm OCD, POCD things. But it was still this background would not shut off fear. It was like I was getting through exposures in order to just survive and get through and be able to do things as a functioning person, so I could functionally do them. I I wasn't anymore walking past a billboard with an image that triggered me and running home to throw up. Like, that's how bad it got for me. That wasn't happening. I could go anywhere I wanted to, but the back of my mind, like my jaw was clenched, my hands were like kind of, what was the white knuckling, and I just didn't feel relaxed. You know that feeling that every OCD sufferer wants, like the idea of like, I would love to just be able to lay on a beach and just switch off my brain and relax like everybody else. Like, that feeling was never there. It was always switched on to the fear and the threat. Now, what I think was the missing piece, so you've got your exposures. Mindfulness helped a lot, just to actually just fundamentally settle my mind as a human, not to push out OCD away. That can be really compulsive. Becoming more mindful in living, recognizing that thoughts are thoughts, to learn about that, absolutely. Because when you learn that, it does help you some of the way, but you don't want to use it compulsively. What's the other one? Distancing yourself from your thoughts. Yeah, that started to happen the more I did exposures. Trying not to ruminate, stopping avoidance. Honestly, this is all amazing stuff. It's the gold standard for OCD. But again, the mission of this channel is talking about something that isn't talked about and needs to be talked about, which is how do we get that extra 30% of the way? Everyone's like 70% recovered with mainstream OCD advice. What about the rest? And that's what happened to me. I was like, I'm mostly better. I'm generally having a good time on holiday. I'm not devastated. I'm not being sick 3 times a week. I'm not having anxiety attacks 4 times a day, but I'm still scared. I'm scared of this being true. And so this is where that last puzzle piece came in of unconditional self and life acceptance. And it so takes time to get your head into it, especially on these themes. And this is why these themes can be really sticky, because it makes more sense in our brains. And we could even talk about this to anybody we meet. Look, if you've got relationship OCD, why would it be so scary to be with someone that you don't love? Loads of people have affairs, loads of people leave their marriage, loads of people, it's pretty normal and people get past it. But harm and POCD type themes, it's a type of thing that if it happened, you become fully written off from society. And so that's why it's such a big one. It's so many people are suffering from it, literally so many people, because it's our current society's monster type thing. Like, this is the worst form of human you could be. And so that is why it's going to latch so hard. So you can't really talk about it. It's very secretive. It's very upsetting. It's very shameful feelings. And so actually, by applying unconditional self and life acceptance to something like a relationship, it's like, oh, okay, I don't like the idea of that if you've got severe ROCD, but it's not like, are you kidding me? That's unbelievable. So I just want to explain briefly what unconditional self and life acceptance is in relation to harm, POCD, sexual orientation, OCD, any form of taboo nature. Okay, it's recognizing that there are actions and behaviors among people. Some are good, some are bad. And you're not going to use this compulsively. You're not going to tell yourself these things when you're triggered. You're going to work on your underlying beliefs about life, about how the world works. You're going to look at the fact that there are people who exist in the world who are the person you fear to be. And they need to be in prison if they've acted on however their brain is set up. So if someone has hurt somebody, killed somebody, done something that you're terrified of, absolutely, the behavior is not okay. They need to be in prison. And so if your big fear is, if I did that, society would write me off and I'd have to go to prison, and that's why it's locking for you, by working through a way to figure out how can I make peace with the fact that even if I went to prison and all of society rejected me, so forgetting about the actual theme at this point, what is the core root fear? No one would ever speak to me again. I'd be written off from society and I would be in prison and I'd get beaten up and all these awful things. Well, this is the reality for people. And this is why the Viktor Frankl book, Man's Search for Meaning, on the reading list is really great, because it shows that people could endure the things that they think is terrifying. Now, this is not to be used, again, as a form of reassurance. It's not like, oh, but it would be okay. It's more about the actual reality of training our brain to respond how someone without OCD would respond. And Rob gave a really good example of this. I think it was either on Twitter or Instagram the other day that I saw, that was basically talking about how when you don't fear something in an OCD perspective, but you fear it in a rational way, and again, I can talk about this because this doesn't latch me, and if you've got the same themes as me, it probably doesn't for you either. He was talking about AI, artificial intelligence, and he has healthy concern about the future of it. So if you had existential OCD that had latched to AI, with what's going on at the moment, I can imagine it's utterly terrifying, because there is a genuine chance that AI could become this big thing in our life and significantly change how we live. Now, similar to what Rob was describing, I'm the same. I've got healthy concern about what life will look like 5-10 years from now as a result of AI, but I'm not obsessing over it, and it hasn't latched. So I have healthy concern, and I definitely don't want the things that some people are suggesting could happen to happen. Definitely don't. But my brain is not latched to it because I'm not utterly terrified of it. I'm at peace with whatever the world wants to bring, find a way through it. Or maybe we won't, and that's fine too. I'm just going to live for today and enjoy it. And so that's the difference. That's what you're aiming for through unconditional self and life acceptance. It's a tool that helps your brain react the same way as someone without OCD. People get really scared and they think, I'm training my brain to act like someone who's committed these crimes, so I don't care, and I want it, and I don't. It's not that. It's, think of something you're not scared of. Think of a crime you could commit that you're not scared of, like shoplifting. Doesn't do anything for me. You can go to prison for serious. If you stole jewels, does this even happen? If you went into a castle and stole jewels, I don't know if it's just like a cartoon thing. If you went and stole jewels and that's why you went to prison, does it bother you that much? No, and that's why you're not obsessing about stealing things. You're not avoiding shops going, what if I go in that shop and just steal something? Because like anyone could do that. You could just do that. And then, oh my gosh, I'd have stolen something, I go to prison. No, you're scared of something because of being written off from society. And so by working on unconditional self and life acceptance, for me, it wasn't actually about what was going to happen to me. It was about, what if I am this person and I'm just hiding it? And growing up, I felt like this weird person who was hiding something, like I had a dead body buried in the backyard. That's how I felt. It was like this, I'm going to be found out any minute. It's all going to come out. And I remember one of the most triggered times I've ever experienced in my life. I was just sitting down to pizza with a few friends. And one of the friends, he said, the thing with people is, it always comes out in the end who they really are. You can't hide. It's a bit of a philosophical chat, and he said something like, yeah, you can't run from who you truly are that long. Like, it'll show up in different places. And there's something that I find interesting to even talk about now. It's just a debate. Like, it's interesting, isn't it? Like, if you're fundamentally a type of person and you're trying to do something against that, it's like, it's going to show up. Like, you're not going to feel fulfilled. It's not going to be for you. But he said it in a way that was like, you can't run from who you are. And my OCD absolutely hit the roof. I think I was in bed for 4 days. I threw up immediately. I was in bed for 3 or 4 days. I literally was like, I'm hiding, because he was talking about drinking on weekends and nights out, trying to hide from who you are. And it was like, that's what I'd been doing. I'd been doing it the night before. And it just absolutely floored me. Now, if you're not scared of who you are and who you could be, and the fact that you don't want to be this feared person, but those feared people do exist, and even if you were like them from some genetic reason or lived experience, then that would be the cards you'd been dealt, and you'd have to figure out a way to live with that reality as other people have. And it sounds crazy and really scary, but at the same time, if someone is that, like, if they just are, then that's the reality. And so it's not about making peace and agreeing that you are that. The thing is with OCD, if there was a 0.0001% chance of you being something or acting on something, like with anyone, there's a chance of anyone committing a harm act. Anyone pushed hard enough could commit a harm act, and deeply regret it. And so because you've got that small chance in your brain, it's like that's 100% to OCD. So I would never be able to, on this video, really explain exactly how unconditional self and life acceptance operates and works. All I can say is it started to make more and more sense the more I worked through it. So what I had to do as part of my exposure work when I was going through this process is and this is very mainstream, this is not off the wall, I would be watching documentaries about the people I feared, starting to see them as humans who ended up the way they are. And I just started to see them more in a way that someone without OCD would. Like, oh, I wouldn't like to be like that. What the heck will happen with those guys? What are they? That's like an awful way to live. But I was also getting a deeper level of acceptance of not writing a person off and just observing them as a person who behaves in a certain way and is a certain way. And so now I can more rationally see fears in the same way as someone without OCD. I don't overthink it. Things might get to me that would someone who doesn't have OCD, like, oh, that's a bit uncomfortable, I don't like that. But it's not that deep, locked on, every day, freaking me out. And so we need to tackle the element of, but what if it's real? So that your brain, not compulsively, your brain goes, I'm not worried about if it's real, because even if it was real, that's happened to other people. I'm not going to give it my time of day. So it's how someone without OCD responds to a fear that you have. I truly believe, I feel like I could say I know that this is the missing piece in why so many people are stuck on harm and POCD. Is because there's nothing in today's like therapy pack, you could call it, all the things that we're recommended, that addresses that. It's like, let's the best therapists in the world would never say, let's look at why you would never do that, and they would know that that is not going to help. But there are thousands, probably millions of therapists doing that because they're misguided. So the globally recognized OCD specialists are obviously incredible at OCD recovery, but I just wonder if they put in unconditional self and life acceptance and rational thinking into their toolkit, I wonder if even more people would be getting better, because I'm not sure that people need this element if it's not severe OCD. So that's why it's the gold standard, everything we talk about. We're not going against all the mainstream advice, but I really think that a lot more people would be a lot better. Like, I've spoken to people who have anxiety and I've just gone straight there with the worst case scenario. Like, I've got a friend who's really scared of vomiting. I just went straight there. I was like, let's say you're going to vomit every day for the rest of your life. Do you reckon you could live with that? We had this hour-long conversation and she was like, actually, yeah, like what I'm scared of is not that big a deal, is it? And it was like, but what if it happens? How do I control it not happening? It's like, okay, let's say it does happen, then you make peace with it. And that's a really easy example for someone who's not scared of vomiting. And she's got a long way to go towards being comfortable to even do exposures. But immediately she could see, the thing I'm fearing isn't that scary. And I'm going to leave you with this. The only thing you have to do is look at something that is terrible in real life, in actuality, that you aren't scared of from an OCD perspective, and ask yourself, why is your OCD not latching there? It's because you're not scared of it. If you don't have health OCD, you're not saying that cancer is good. You're not saying that you want cancer. You're just saying, I'm not worried about it. It's not something I'm going to give my time to. The word obsessive in OCD is not looked at enough. It is literally an obsession that is based around fear. Simply put, what you're scared of is where OCD will latch. Same way it latched to me on friendships when I was a kid, on the dark when I was a kid, on being too thin when I was not eating because of OCD. You know, all these things, once you get to the root of, well, what am I really scared of here? And then figuring out with unconditional self and life acceptance how to overcome that fear in a non-compulsive way is going to be the ticket to overcoming. But what if it's real? So it's like, if you say to yourself, but what if it's real? And your brain goes, I don't even care if it's real. Oh, it kind of dissipates. So now with fears that I used to have, where I'm not scared of them anymore, that just happens automatically because my brain is structured differently. People go into it going, I've tried the unconditional self-acceptance thing. It's like, what do you mean you've tried it? It's a whole life mindset shift. It's not easy. And unfortunately, nothing great is easy. And so if you're wanting a quick fix, it's not going to work. You're going to need to decide. I'm reading all of the reading list, which you can find on the OCDrecovery.com website. I might actually do another video on the reading list if anyone's interested, talk you through each book and what I took from it along my journey. You are going to need to watch and do a lot more than this video. I obviously have not gone that far into how it works, but there is a video that I did that I will ask them to link it below in the comments. breaking down unconditional self and life acceptance and how it works from a little while ago that I did. And you can watch that, you get into the reading list and just really get into this. Now, I would suggest if you want a next step, you're reading the books, you're watching this channel, the webinars that OCD Recovery hosts are really worth watching. So if you're like on Instagram and you want to follow OCD Recovery, they regularly promote the webinars coming up. It's a really cost-effective way to just hop on and throw a couple of questions forward. I think that's a really good one to like just try out and understand a bit more in a tailored approach. But the other thing you can do if funds are an issue, and obviously you can do one-to-one coaching with the guys, the other thing you can do if funds are an issue is literally just ask your question below, and on my next video, my next Q&A video, I will answer that for you. I hope that's been useful. You can definitely get better. I did, loads of other people did. Life is so much better than it was, and you're never too stuck to get better. That's the main thing, but it takes a lot of hard work. And thanks for watching.